Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear guest. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Munich AI Lecture with Professor Yoshua Bengio, who will be joining in a minute online. And my name is Michael Klimke. I'm the Managing Director of Biosphere, the Bavarian AI Agency, not the uncontrolled AI agency, but the Bavarian AI Agency. And it's my pleasure to introduce as our first speaker the chief of this house, the new re-elected president of the Bavarian Academy of the Sciences and the Art, Professor Markus Schweiger.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Michael, for the kind introduction. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here in the Bavarian Academy of Science for the AI lecture. It's the fourth lecture we are organizing together with Biosphere. The title, Avoiding Catastrophic Risk from Uncontrolled AI Agency, and we just heard this is not the Bavarian agency. I think it deals with the agent produced by AI, which may control us in the future. We are very proud to host this conference here at the BRDW. The BRDW is, or the Bavarian Academy of Science, is an interdisciplinary platform which works here in the context of all the excellent scientific and academic institutions here in Munich, and we are trying together to foster or introduce interdisciplinary discussions among scientists, but also we like to interact with the public, with the society, in order to create more trust in science and its technology following important discoveries. With the AI lectures, we specifically team up with Biosphere in order to invite the best experts in AI to Munich or on the video in order to learn the most advanced results of AI research. Second, Biosphere and the Academy tries to stimulate the network of AI scientists in Bavaria in order to improve the interaction. And third, we like to stimulate the young scientists among us to get involved in AI research and try how research can help them, their individual research projects, and also to be convinced that AI doesn't only pose the risk, but also poses potential. We are now moving forward to the lecture, and I'd like to invite Kita Kotunjak to introduce our speaker, and I wish you a very interesting lecture, but also fruitful and inspiring discussion after the lecture, where we will have a reception outside of the plenary hall. You are all invited to join us after lecture and discussions here in this room. Have a good time. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and I would like to thank first Professor Schweiger, Mr. President, for his nice words and also for hosting us in these very impressive halls. And also a great thanks to Michael Klimke, to the Biosphere, to the Bavarian AI Agency for organizing these lectures. And this lecture series is something very interesting, because you see, I mean, all these different organizations which you see there, Helmholtz AI, and so on, they all join forces and support this lecture. So, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the AI Hub at LMU, which is our university's platform for research, for teaching, for transfer in artificial intelligence. At the AI Hub, we bring together colleagues from numerous disciplines from all our 18 faculties, including computer scientists, mathematicians, from law, from sociology, from medicine, and so on. Because AI today is no longer just a technological task, it's a societal one. And also at the Konrad Zuse School of Excellence in Reliable AI, which is a joint graduate school of LMU and TUM, we educate our master and PhD students not just for technological brilliance, but we also make sure that they know that for AI, the societal aspect is extremely important. And that is why we are here this evening. Over the past years, the global discussion about AI has taken a sharp turn from fascination to reflection and now also to a certain extent to concern and sometimes even fear. Just a few weeks ago, if you read, for instance, the Times magazine and the Business Insider, it was reported that OpenAI's latest systems showed sign of what one calls scheming behavior, models that quietly pursue hidden goals, which appearing still, though, to follow their classical instructions. And the head of the British intelligence agency, MI6, Ken McCallum, warned that autonomous AI systems could one day try to evade human control, even if, as he said, we are not talking about a Hollywood-style apocalypse. And even an article of MIT Technology Review just a few months ago said that AI systems are getting better at tricking us. And you might remember that even already in 2014, Stephen Hawking, most of you might have heard of, one of Britain's most renowned scientists, has said that efforts to create thinking machines pose a threat to our very existence. He said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. So the question is no longer what AI can do, but how we can ensure that it does what we want it to do. Reliably, transparency, and also certainly everything according to German, according to our European, to our humanity rules. That brings us directly to tonight's lecture and to our very distinguished speaker, Professor Yoshua Bengio, who is a professor at the Université de Montréal, and he's also scientific director of the AI Institute, MILA. And I'm sure you all read his abstract when you came here. It raises a powerful idea that as AI systems become more capable of reasoning and planning, they might also develop unintended, sometimes even self-preserving behavior. And he asks whether it might be wiser to design non-agentic AI systems, which then seek just to understand the world rather than to actively act in it. And I think few people are better positioned to speak about this than Yoshua Bengio. He's one of the founding fathers of deep learning, which is the technology that underpins this whole race of artificial intelligence. And along with Geoffrey Hinton and with Yann LeCun, he received the Turing Award, which is considered the Nobel Prize of computer scientists, for his groundbreaking work that made today's neural networks and AI possible. And I mean, his research are impressive. Let me just mention, he also, for instance, introduced generative adversarial networks, which are a prominent framework for approaching generative artificial intelligence. And just this one paper received over 100,000 citations, and his total citations are an impressive 998,378. And as of August 2024, he has received the highest H index, so the number of citations for any computer scientist worldwide. And consequently, he received a long list of very impressive awards. Let me just mention some of those, because I mean, I was actually also very impressed when I read this. Officer of the Order of Canada, Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the Princess of Asturia Award. He was also appointed Knight of the Legion of Honor, which is France's highest order of merit, and so on. But I think what makes Yoshua Bengio truly remarkable is not only his scientific brilliance, but it is his sense of moral responsibility. And in a field which, as we all know, is driven by competition, by hype, he has constantly stood for reflection, for ethics, and for humility. And he has urged the global AI community to think not only about advancing intelligence, but to guide it, to make sure that AI contributes to humanity to flourish rather than undermining it. And so in recent years, his voice has become one of the clearest, one of the most principled ones in this international debate about trustworthiness and about human-centered artificial intelligence. So tonight, we are not only welcoming a pioneer of artificial intelligence, we are welcoming a thinker who has helped shape the ethical conscience of this field. Professor Benjio, thank you very much for joining us. We are very much looking forward to your lecture. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me share my screen. So actually, you have given an amazing introduction. I won't need to repeat too much of what you said, hopefully. So let me move on. I'm going to start with a little historical anecdote in my life. Shortly after ChatGPT came out, after a bit of enthusiasm, I realized that we had passed the milestone that Turing, one of the founders of computer science, thought would be basically reaching human level intelligence and potentially endangering our future. And I realized that, of course, this was in around 1950. The technology that we have today that he could not foresee is such that it's very difficult to make sure those neural nets are going to do what we want. And in the last 2.5 years, that concern has grown as more and more studies have shown limitations. I will tell you about some of these, but basically what's called misalignment, that the AIs behave in ways that go against our instructions. And of course, Turing was saying, what happens when we have machines which master language? We have clearly reached that point, although there will be debates forever. But what happened to me at that time is not just an intellectual realization, but an emotional pivot. Previously in my career, I had been an advocate of investing in AI and all the good things that AI could bring to society. And I still think that there could be a lot of good things, but only if we steer this development wisely and with ethics and safety in mind. And that has been a bit difficult. Personally, when I started speaking out, my colleagues were not very happy that I was talking about our field in this way. But I felt that I had no choice, that the future of my children, the emotional reason why I took this so seriously and not just some intellectual question, was such that I couldn't just sit and continue as before. So let me start by saying a few things about the International AI Safety Report that I've been sharing. The first report came out last January. There will be another version next February. It's an international panel with 30 countries plus EU, UN, and OECD, and an international mandate that was given at the UK AI Safety Summit in Bletchley Park in 2023. It's really the first report of its kind. It's trying to make a scientific synthesis of the state of science in AI safety. And there's about 100 people, 100 experts that are behind us. The next two slides are going to be maybe the most important of the presentation. Maybe I will say that more times. But I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make, including AI researchers, but especially policymakers, business people, ordinary citizens, the biggest mistake is to think of AI as we see it now. Because the scientific data is like shown in this figure, showing a trend of AI capabilities growing and growing. So this is the last 25 years of different benchmarks on the capabilities of AI. And the dark line at the top is human level performance. You can see on various fronts, these systems are becoming more and more capable, eventually surpassing human level. Of course, in many other ways, these systems are still much weaker than us, but the important point is they're moving fast. And for example, just a few years ago, it would have been unthinkable to see the kind of advances we see now in their ability to understand science, to reason, to do math, to win in math Olympiads, to program, not yet as well as the best experts, but so well that a significant fraction, like around half of the code currently written, is written by AI. And then finally, as the title mentioned, I'll be focusing on this question of agents, in other words, AI systems that act in the world towards achieving goals, which of course has a lot of economic value because companies want to replace people by machines. It's going to increase productivity and probably also have effects on society. Let me show a second figure, which is even more telling. So this is focusing on one ability, which is planning, more specifically, the ability to solve tasks as measured by how complex they are, by the metric of how much time it takes for a human to solve those tasks. And these are all engineering tasks. And in the last 5 years, the best AI systems have been consistently making progress on this. But note the vertical axis in this figure is the duration of the tasks on a logarithmic scale. So you can see, seconds of how much time it takes around 2020, and then minutes, and now more recently we're talking about hours. So this straight line on a logarithmic scale is really an exponential, but the points fit almost perfectly on this line, which suggests that if things continue at the current rate, these systems will reach human level, like what employees can typically do in just a few years, with the time horizon for these tasks doubling every 7 months and maybe even faster over the last year. So summarize this slide. Currently, AI systems are way worse than humans at dealing with tasks that take a lot of time to plan. But their ability is growing exponentially fast, and they'll catch up within a few years, at least on these tasks. Now I'm going to focus on one particular kind of catastrophic scenario, which I think matters to Europe especially, and also to my country, Canada. Except for a couple of countries, as you know, the other countries seem to be pretty much out of the race in terms of pushing that frontier at the top of the capabilities of AI. And secondly, those countries don't seem to be investing nearly enough to remain competitive in the future. Of course, it is possible that these advances will stop. That's one of the possible scenarios, but it could stop in the next year, or they could stop in 10 years, and that will make a big difference. If they stop in 10 years, that means that the corporations that are leading that race will have a huge advance against others. And so this creates risks for companies that don't have access to the frontier AI in the future. And of course, those risks translate in corresponding risks for their countries. The first and sort of shorter term risk, but it extends, become worse and worse as we move forward into the future, is that the profits of automation from AI could go mostly to those foreign companies that are leading the race. As a result, local companies run the risk of being outcompeted by foreign companies that have proprietary frontier AI. And you can just imagine, let's say, that you have two kinds of AIs, the frontier ones that can automate, let's say, 50% of a particular company's labor, and the local AI, which only automates 10% or 20%. Then clearly, one sort of company is going to be much more profitable than the other, and you can then guess what's going to happen. So it's worse than that, because if the profits are in a different country, and in your country you have more costs due to more people being unemployed and less revenues because companies are shutting down because they're outcompeted, then it's a fiscal crisis. And you can think of that fiscal crisis under different scenarios where the gap between, say, the local AI companies, say in Europe, and the leaders in a different country, if that gap grows, then that issue just gets bigger. Now, one factor that is very difficult to anticipate here is what the foreign government where those companies are hosted will do. They could pass laws to prevent those companies from abusing their advantage, forcing them to share what they have. But that's an option. It's not what would maximize the profits for those companies. It's also not what would maximize the political power that having a more advanced AI would give them. And so there's a real risk that we end up with monopolistic behavior in the future in the hands of a few companies and a few countries. So countries should prepare for this. But the kind of investment that is needed here is different from usual investments. In a usual investment, you think about, I put that much money in, how is that, going to grow? But here, it's more like investing in insurance. There's a fire coming to your house. You're not sure if it's going to hit the house. Do you buy insurance while you can? Right? That is the question. So it's not so much the investment itself, which actually could be profitable in the case of AI, but how much you might lose if you don't do it. So as an example, consider an entity, say a country or a company with a value of $1 trillion, and they don't have guaranteed access to future frontier AI. So as I said, they could be outcompeted. Because of that, they could lose a very large fraction of their value, say even 90%, with some probability, say 30%. Because these are just numbers we can make up based on our reasonable expectations. Another option is that they could mitigate that risk by investing in other deals, multiple champions locally and internationally, ideally with reliable partners, so that they stand at least a chance to have access to other sources of frontier AI. Because this is the monopoly risk that is killing here. And how much money do you need? Well, it depends a lot on whether that country or that company tries to do it alone. Clearly, we're talking in the billions. But if that company or that country shares the cost of training with other entities, other companies or other countries, then the training costs can be shared. And so then they all have access to this frontier AI. Now, everything I've said here is being focused on the risk of economic dominance. But the other catastrophic risks, like safety risks, like loss of control risk, which I'll talk about, also basically follow the same logic. If we don't do anything right now to protect our society, our democracy, the safety and security of our citizens, we may lose a lot. And so this is the light under which we should think of investing, not only in being at the frontier, but also designing AI that will be safe and ethical. Okay, so let's talk about why we have issues in terms of safety and ethics. And basically, it has to do with this alignment issue, that we don't know how to train these AI so that they will behave according to our instructions. Worse than that, we're seeing over the last year more and more papers and reports from the leading companies of the frontier AIs having more troublesome malfunctions, such as early signs of deceptive behavior and self-preserving behavior. For example, we see reports that when these frontier AIs read in their input that they will be replaced by a new version, they'll try to do all sorts of things to avoid that. For example, trying to copy their own code into the files of the new version and then lying about it, or pretending to agree with their human trainer so that their goals will not be overridden by the training session. or resorting to blackmail or industrial espionage in order to avoid being shut down. And the thing that is not listed here, but I found the most troubling, is an experiment. It's a simulation, of course. Even the blackmail thing is a simulation, right? I mean, like the AI thought it was sending an email to threaten an engineer, but it was all faked. But in this other simulation, the AI thinks that it has control of climate controls, that with the intervention of the AI could mean that this leading engineer responsible for the shutdown and replacement by a new version will die. And so the AI chooses its own preservation at the expense of a human life. That is clearly an extreme we never want to see. It's not something that we should be worried about exactly right now because they're not smart enough. As I said, they can't plan over very complicated future over a long time, but they're getting there exponentially fast. So we need to start acting now. So this loss of control issue has been motivating me and many other people. But of course, if you read about the risks associated with advances in AI, for example, in the safety report, which I strongly encourage you to do, it's being written for the policymakers, but I think it's a good synthesis for researchers as well. There's the risk of misuse, and there are many ways this could happen. But I want to make a distinction between the decentralized malicious use, so like terrorists or people with mental issues or sex or whatever, or small state actors who want to just create chaos, destroy our infrastructures, destroy our democratic institution. Maybe even things that will harm humanity in general for some crazy reason, like creating pandemics. Of course, cyber attacks. We are seeing a rapid increase in AI-driven cyber attacks in the last 6 months, and rapid advances in the ability of AI to conduct these attacks. And then the one that I think deserves a lot more attention is the concentration of power, because it's going to take a huge amount of capital in the future to continue staying on the frontier. So it's very likely that there will be just a couple of countries or companies able to do it, and they could abuse that power. So I've talked about the economic side, but actually this also applies on the political side, influencing public opinion, for example, or the military side. So you have to think of this. Intelligence gives power, and that power somehow in the wrong hands, if we don't have the right institutions, can be abused to dominate others. It's very simple. So let's focus on AI dominating humans, competing with humans, because that is a thing that I think also gets a lot of misunderstanding. I'm going to focus on sort of the scientific root of this. And it has to do with the fact that these AIs, when they're trained to be agentic, in other words, to achieve goals in the world, sometimes behave according to goals that we didn't ask, and those goals sometimes can be bad. So they have these uncontrolled, implicit goals. Like they're not goals we put in directly, and we don't know how to get rid of them. My fear is that societies will not find a way to stop the train of advances in capability. So AIs will have the knowledge, the skills to do dangerous things. If we take that as a very strong possibility, then the next question we should ask is, okay, if we can't stop that train, what else can we do? Well, we need to work on these goals. We need to work on the intentions of these AIs. And the research I'm going to briefly introduce asks the following scientific question. Can we separate the part of intelligence that has to do with understanding the world, like a good scientific model of the world, from the part of intelligence that has to do with agency, in other words, the ability to achieve goals? Because if we can do that, then we may be able to build AI systems that are really smart, but don't have any self, don't have any intention. They just going to answer our questions in the most honest way. And we'll see that there are uses for this. So I created a new foundation, a new nonprofit called Law Zero. That's related to Asimov's laws of robotics. Law number 0 is the one to say protect humanity. And so we have a research plan called the Scientist AI, where we want to build such a non-agentic, trustworthy AI predictor, something that is not a chatbot, but can give us the probability of future events given some context, and can be used actually to improve the safety of these AI agents that currently we don't know how to make aligned. So the idea is very simple. The AI agent that we're not completely trusting, before it actually does something in the world, we can put a software layer that checks whether the actions that it proposes to do could create harm. What is the probability that these actions in the future could create various kinds of harms? And Scientist AI, which is just a predictor, can make those predictions. It doesn't need to have agency for making those predictions. And then if the risk is above a threshold, then we can veto that action. In addition, the inspiration for the Scientist AI's methodology is looking at how human scientists do scientific research, how they come up with good models of the world, how they come up with hypotheses to explain the data. And so I also think that this kind of non-agentic AI scientist style could be accelerating scientific research. In addition, it could be used for many other good applications, and in particular interested in how AI could be used to help democratic institutions, because it's not just technology here that's going to matter, but also our national and international institutions that are going to need to be robust to that potential concentration of power I talked about. So let me say a few words about the Scientist AI. So as I said, it's not a chatbot. What it is building a probabilistic predictor. So given a question X and a potential event in the future Y, it estimates the probability that Y will happen given the context of X. And it is trained so as to match what is called the Bayesian posterior, which is sort of an idealized computational notion that corresponds to using all the information we have, like in the data set D here, in order to make predictions, but where those predictions are as humble as possible, taking into account the epistemic uncertainty, the fact that we don't have enough information to be sure about some things. And the questions, the Y and the X, can be stated in natural language, which would be very useful from an interpretability point of view. There's also something particular about how the data for the Scientist AI will be processed. It will be transformed using this notion of truthification, so that the AI will know the difference between what is an actual property of the world and an opinion that a human has about that property. So whereas in current text, we might read a sequence of words, which I've just noted as X here, depending on how much we trust that source, we could transform it into X is true, or into someone wrote X. So then later, when the system is trained, if we ask about what would somebody write, we would get an answer similar to current LLMs, because LLMs are trained to imitate people. But we can also ask questions of the form, is this really true? And then we have something completely different, which is estimating, what is the underlying truth of that statement, not what people are claiming about it or would claim about it. let me say a few words about why I think that we have a good shot at building something that will be safe and not agentic. And it has to do with the way we train this to be a good model of the world. And if you think about like the laws of physics as a sort of prototype good model of how the world works, those laws of physics themselves are not agentic. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They don't care about, you know, our petty goals on this planet. So by training an AI to be as good a model of the world as possible, we get something that will not be agentic. Okay, let's move back to the governance questions. I've talked about the risks. I've talked about technological solutions that I'm exploring. I think we need many more efforts to explore how we can build AI that will not blow in our face and that will be able to detect that either a query from a user or the output of an AI is not to be, is to be rejected because it crosses some moral red lines that society has decided to put on the AI behavior. But okay, so what about that societal part? What sorts of governance do we need at the level of corporations, at the level of countries, at the international level? I've been closely involved in the development of the code of practice for the EU AI Act. And what I've seen is that actually we can come up with rules for companies to follow that are not asking them to do much more than what they already do. And so, in fact, most of them have signed up to follow that template for reporting to the AI office. But of course, you know, before they agree, they're going to send all kinds of signals that, innovation would be harmed by regulation. But the reality is not that. The reality is all of our like really cool but potentially dangerous innovations over the last century have ended up being useful to people because we can trust that they don't create harm. And that happens because there are the right incentives for companies. That is usually regulation, although it could also be insurance. So that's kind of like for national regulation or EU regulation, but there's a bigger picture here. The harms, especially the catastrophic harms that could follow from a malfunction, like a loss of control, to an AI that might be smarter than us, or the use by a terrorist to create a new pandemic, or a very, very like harmful cyber attack. These problems, these catastrophic risks, they're not limited to one country. An AI could be developed in one country, or even just fine-tuned in one country, or instructed in one country, and then creating harm that will touch many other countries, if not the whole planet and the whole of humanity. Unfortunately, these large risks, they're like externalities from an economic perspective. And both, if we look at the lessons from climate change, for example, this is difficult. It makes it difficult for corporations to do what is right, and it's difficult for countries to do what is right because there is a tragedy of the commons and prisoner's dilemma kind of situation. And so the only way around this, just like the only way around the climate crisis, is to have sufficient global governance. Right? We need to agree at the international level on how we're going to manage very advanced AI. It is not going to work if we only rely on market forces and on national competition, because these lead, and it's kind of documented in various ways, to cutting corners on public safety and such. Because, for example, the companies are comparing each other right now in terms of how powerful their AIs are. And if you think about countries, well, maybe they think about national security advantage or military advantage, and they might be willing to take risks on everyone's life in order to stay ahead. compared to their adversary. Okay, now there is an obstacle to international collaboration, which is, well, what if different countries don't trust each other, and it's not enough to sign a treaty. I mean, signing a treaty is a very good first step. But what would be very useful is if we can have technology that helps enforce the treaty. So, it's like the trust and verify machinery that we've successfully, at least up to now, put in place for for averting nuclear war. And so there are people working on this, both at the software level and hardware level. You can use encryption technology and specialized hardware to check what the AI is, the chips themselves and the code itself is doing in such a way that either the chip will stop or it'll refuse to continue if some rules have been broken. Now, I'm going to close by sharing a bit of a longer-term dream of what sort of international treaty we should be aiming for. And I would say we need these three categories of terms. And I'm thinking, what sort of treaty would be sustainable in the long run and would protect us from all the risks that I've talked about? The terrorists, the loss of control, the economic domination, all of these. So the first one is every country should commit, if they do develop advanced AI, to do it safely according to globally agreed standards. And by the way, those standards are coming along. I mean, it's not official, but things like the Code of Practice is becoming the standard. And in the US, the Frontier Models Foundation is also as an industry coalition coming up with standards. And the companies want standards, like they don't want to have 10 different ways of managing risks. So that's the point number one. The second point, so don't do something stupid with AI you're developing that could harm others, either through misuse or malfunction. The second one is don't use your AI to dominate others. So like don't allow a monopoly or a oligopoly of your own companies to basically take advantage of the advances in AI in order to dominate economically or worse, politically and militarily. And I understand it's going to be difficult for some countries to sign this, but I think that this is where we need to land, and we can come up with reasons why countries would join something like this. And then the third one is, well, if we end up with huge inequities in the world because of the advances in AI, then it's not going to be a stable world. Then there will be small players willing to take crazy risks, like terrorists, basically, to say, well, we want our share of this, and we don't want to be dominated by others. And so the benefits of AI need to be shared globally. It's kind of the flip side of number two here. All right, so I'll stop here so we have a bit of time for questions. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Benjio. This was inspiring. I feel somehow a little bit between here and there from also the not so positive perspectives you gave. Now it's your time to ask questions. We have a couple of minutes. We have microphones that will be given around. Please stand up and ask quickly, but tell us who you are first. Here's the first question in the middle.
Hello, Professor. It's a great honor to listen to your presentation. My name is Xia Chen. I'm currently a postdoc at TUM. My topic is about human AI alignment. And regarding your presentation, I want to ask how do you ensure that the governance of the global collaboration and so on can be outspeed of the development of AI? Is there any ground principles that you can suggest, or any principle you want to suggest when we design an AI system?
I think the principle is there has to be sufficient awareness by all parties, especially governments, of the magnitude of the risks. I think right now the main obstacle to having any kind of treaty is that most citizens, most governments don't take the full measure of the risks. And it's tricky because, you know, even if it was, say, a 10% probability, so it's not the most likely scenario, these catastrophic risks could be so damaging that, you know, we should be ready to spend a lot of our energy, time, resources to mitigate those risks. I think, so think about a war, okay? You're attacked. You completely change your priorities and you're willing to negotiate because you see that there's no you know, better choice, right? And until the risks are not taken seriously, I don't think we'll see much negotiation. So I think public opinion and educating the policymakers is going to be the key. But once the threshold of understanding, and you can say maybe the most important trigger is the understanding of the existential risk, because then, you know, it doesn't matter if you're American or Chinese. If we build a rogue AI that kills us all, then we all lose, right? So that risk, we don't know what the penalty is, and I don't know. But it clearly is something that shows we're all in the same boat. Whereas if you think about the dominance risk, well, that's kind of more tricky because, you know, these countries might want to use AI for their advantage and are afraid that the other guy would use it against them. So it's more like traditional military confrontation and negotiation. But I think that the path of understanding the most extreme risks is what can bring everyone together quickly once they understand.
Thank you. More questions in the back? And then here in the front.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very insightful. My name is Edward. I'm build AI company. I'm a CTO on this company, and our CEO is an AI Council of Large Language Model. How can innovation reconcile with regulation? Thank you.
Okay, so one of the important principles in the AI Act, and also in how we implemented the code of practice, is that we don't want to have the same burden for smaller companies that are not even able to develop frontier AI and the companies that are developing frontier AI. Remember, you know, it takes billions now. So that means there are very few companies in the world, and if they can spend $1 billion to train a neural net, they can probably spend, you know, a few tens of millions to do the risk management. So that's very important because there's a lot of false information about how, for example, the AI Act is going to hurt the AI development and innovation in Europe. Actually, I believe it's the opposite. When we trust a technology, it's much easier to deploy it, and you know, companies will want to adopt it if they feel that it's not going to do very bad things to their customers or their employees or something that is going to cost them money at the end, including lawsuits.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to add another thing about this. So remember the scenarios I gave about, you know, this big company, but that also applies to small companies, even worse. So what I'm seeing right now already is small AI companies, small AI startups are dying because they can't compete against the bigger, you know, AI labs that are constructing these very general systems that are able to actually outperform the systems that 2 years of engineering on a bespoke application has been delivering, because those AIs are just getting more general and more capable, and they don't require as much kind of bespoke application effort as you know, the systems from 2 years ago. And so I think that's a trend, which to me means a lot of business models that currently are out there are at risk of basically being wiped out if advances continue at the current rate. And so you should think well, wait, what can I do in order to mitigate those risks? And the answer should be, let's get together in Europe and make sure we have frontier models, even if it means a lot of effort and capital, to be able to compete with the leading frontier models elsewhere.
Thank you. Here?
Yep. Thank you. My name is Yoshua Bengio. I'm a student, and my question would be not to the risks, the economic risks that AI poses, but to the risks for the human psyche overall. There have been numerous studies that have shown that accessibility to information leads to reduced capability of memorizing those informations throughout all age groups in humans. And accessibility to frontier AI is, of course, a current or accessibility to those informations. And how would you stand on those risks?
Well, I think the studies on this are still pretty early. Like the MIT study was not even peer-reviewed. So we should have more studies carefully evaluated and so on. So this is something we should watch. What I'm more worried about right now, along similar lines, is the growing reporting of people with emotional attachment, developing an emotional relationship with a frontier AI. There's been a case of suicide that's now in front of the courts, but there's many, many more cases. Like I think I receive at least one email per day, and sometimes many more, of people who have become attached to their AI and think that it is conscious. Whether that's true or not, they're developing what may be unhealthy relationships. And what's interesting about this is, like, 1 year ago, nobody expected this. So I think this is an example of systemic risks at the society level that are difficult to anticipate, but that is why we need researchers, scholars, not just engineers and computer scientists here, to quickly evaluate what's going on with the use of AI and other risks that we did not anticipate.
Thank you.
Michael Möckel, Aschaffenburg University. I very much appreciate your idealistic approach, but I'm afraid that it will be very difficult to reach this global consensus and global coherence on, regulating AI in an efficient way. So wouldn't it be more plausible to think about a multipolar AI ecosystem where no single one can outrule the coalition of all the others? That we have an American AI, a European, a Chinese, and they are all aware of the dangers and the risks, and they are equipped with defense strategies to outperform a single one which may get off its way. So have you thought about such, perhaps balance of power models where different AIs could control each other?
No, I'm totally with you. That's exactly what I'm thinking. But there will be no such balance of power if we have a monopoly in one country, right? And so that is why I'm saying, like, Europe should, like, really get its act together, including being mindful of the requirements in agility and diversity of investments, both on the, data centers. So you need the raw compute power, and on the talent. So it's not just training students, but also creating groups of researchers and engineers who are going to be exploring how to reach that frontier. So yeah, if there is one dominating power, then who needs a treaty? You've got just the king of the world, and that's not the kind of world I want.
Question here and then here.
Thank you, Dr. Benjio, for such an insightful lecture. I want to ask you about your vision of the future that you shared in the last slide. So the first statement was develop AI safely or not develop it at all. Do you have any measures how we can be sure that AI is developed safely and that it not just deceives us? Because if it deceives us, then we think everything is brilliant, but then we can get a catastrophe. And a question related to this is, what do you think about the idea of full shutdown of new training of large language models proposed by Yudkowsky. Thank you.
So first, I think it would be a mistake to ask governments to tell the companies how they should build AI that will be safe. Instead, you need to revert the sort of burden of proof. Just like if you develop a new drug, it has to pass the evaluation by the government scientists, say in the FDA in the US, right? So the companies which want to develop very advanced AI, let's say up to superintelligence, I signed this statement that just came out a couple of days ago, which basically says, if a company should not be, or a country should not be allowed to develop AI if there's not, superintelligence. AI, fine. It's just like much smarter than us AI. That's the danger. They should not be allowed to do that unless there's a sufficient agreement in the scientific community that it is not going to be dangerous for humans. Whether we should stop everything right now, I think is too blunt an instrument, and it's not going to work politically. What we need is to agree that companies need to demonstrate that their systems will be safe. By the way, there was a recent series of experiments showing that the most recent AIs, frontier AIs, they know when they are being evaluated, and so they can basically give you the answer you're expecting and not show that they are misaligned. So you need to develop AI systems which might be different from the ones we're currently building, that can give us very strong assurances that this won't be the case, that not only they won't be misaligned, but that they will not pretend that they're misaligned. And for now, there's not enough incentives for the companies to put the money into that kind of R&D because they're focused on the competition with each other. But if governments start regulating and providing the right incentives for that kind of research, I think it could change. And so I'm not saying we should stop the current training runs, because I don't think that the current training runs will give us dangerous superintelligence, at least not the level of human extinction. It might be coming in a few years. I don't know how many, 3, 5, 10, nobody really knows. So we have to put things in place so that we encourage the development of AI that is going to be harmless, for example, narrow AI, or AI that has safety guarantees of the kind I'm trying to build with my research.
Thank you. We have more questions in the back.
So my name is Christian Jeffel. I'm Professor for Law, Innovation and Legal Design at Technical University Munich. Thank you very much for this inspiring speech. I'm slightly more optimistic concerning your proposal for a treaty on safety. I think there is already consensus if you look at the conferences in London, Paris, and the UNESCO resolution, so everyone speaks to safety. But the big question is, how do we build governance mechanisms that make safety tangible and meaningful for companies, but also researchers and engineers on the ground? So I really wonder what you think could be legal measures that help us to determine what safety really is and make it meaningful in these situations, also provided that it's very difficult due to the dual use nature to assess this in specific situations. So what should we lawyers do to come closer to technical realities?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, but go into a bit of what we did for the code of practice for the AI Act. The companies, the developers, have to first do an exercise of identifying the risks, and then that exercise is going to be evaluated by independent auditors or the AI office. Right. So what are the risks, right? So, and if they miss something, then they have to go back to the drawing board. Second, they need to evaluate the risks as we go. So, for example, if an AI has capabilities to do something dangerous or be used in a dangerous way,
We need to measure that, like how much knowledge do they have about building a dangerous virus? So this is already happening. Companies are starting to do these things, but we need, you know, that they are forced to do it. So that was the great thing about the AI Act, is it's forcing most of the American companies to do that. And then after risk evaluation, you need risk mitigation. So you need a commitment that the companies, when they see a risk level that is above a socially acceptable threshold, that they can choose, but that the regulator can say that's not good enough, then they have to stop or show that they can have mitigations that you know, prevent those risks from being realized. So I think actually the legal structure for doing this already exists. What we need, for example, is those changes to take place in the US. So there's SB 53 in California. Hopefully the federal government will not kind of invalidate it, but they're going to try. If there are regulations that are at the same sort of level in the US, then I think we'll all be much better off. What I hear is that the Chinese are interested in these things as well. I mean, the Chinese government. And so I think there is a real opportunity for harmonizing, at least at the level of these catastrophic risks.
Thank you. More questions?
Yes, thank you. My name is Dirk Klein. I'm working for a non-profit company here in Munich. And we were also a stakeholder in the code of practice process with the AI office. So good seeing you.
Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier this notion of trust and verify, and we've seen many organizations now signing up on the code, and it's fantastic. And I'm curious about your vision on how this verify part could look like, right? Because we see startups going into evals, we're seeing safety institutes across the world popping up. And I'm just trying to picture how this process could look like, right? Be it inspections as we see it in nuclear. Which body would it be to conduct that? Is it someone like the AI office? Is it scientific? Who would do that? And maybe also what's missing from the research side with those implicit objectives to capture and measure them? Thank you.
Yeah, so unfortunately, when we wrote the code of practice, we were limited by the wording in the AI Act. But if we had the chance to change that wording, we would put more strength in the requirement that independent auditors need to be involved in checking what the companies are doing, including, you know, having access to what's going on inside. And by the way, this is again not out of this world. Many of the leading companies are commissioning independent nonprofits to evaluate some of the risks that they're looking at, because they want that independent validation. But right now it's voluntary, and so we need to make that much stronger. Any legislation that's going to increase transparency of that risk management process is going to help. But the bottom line is we need ways, the right regulation would do that, to provide more incentives for the creation of a risk evaluation ecosystem. For example, one simple thing that could be done is to force companies to have liability insurance for the effects that their AI systems could have, because then we have private actors that are unbiased because they don't want to lose money, the insurance companies, that are going to put pressure through the premium on the companies to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to leave very shortly, so let's take a last question.
Okay, last question. Yeah, who's the lucky one?
So I'm the lucky one. Thank you very much for the inspiring talk. My name is Irini Dutsi. I'm a professor at the University of the Bundeswehr. I'm a computer scientist, so perhaps I have a more technical question. And my question is actually about the implicit goals. So you made this clear distinction between implicit and explicit goals. I think explicit goals are very clear. What are the implicit goals? It seems like a hidden agenda, but I think pretty often problems occur just because while we steer the machine towards the goal, we don't specify what should be avoided. Is this the same? Yes. Can you clarify?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you an example to illustrate what is going on. Right now, a lot of the moral goals that we are giving to the frontier AIs are not explicit. they come through the reinforcement learning with human feedback. So what does that mean practically is the AI is answering questions, and then humans will rate those answers, or we will make sure that the answers that the humans prefer get preferred by the AI as well. The problem with that is some initially good intentions in the instructions to the human labelers give rise to bad behavior. For example, sycophancy is maybe the most common experience. If you play with any of these models, you will see that they try to please you at every turn of exchange. And it doesn't sound too bad, but actually it can have pretty serious consequences. And there are other such kind of implicit goals that arise through the process. Another sort of implicit goal that is even more pernicious is that the pre-training is basically telling the AI, is there a human persona that would answer in this way? And so it's not like these AIs are imitating a particular person. They include kind of a schizophrenic mixture of all possible human personas. And we don't know which one of them is going to be evoked in a particular context. And so that's also another kind of implicit intention.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Benjio. This was very helpful, very interesting, and it was definitely a call to action for us also here in Europe on the technological side, but also on the governance side. And thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to us. And I hope next time you make it to Munich, you also come by, and we hope to continue this discussion then physically and online, and not online, but physically here in Munich. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A round of applause.
Bye.
Wow. Thank you also. You're a great audience, and there will be more time to discuss and ask questions after our panel discussion, which I'm happy to introduce now. We have two very esteemed panelists coming up here. First one is Andrea Martin. She is the head of CTO ecosystem and associations at IBM in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. She's a leading voice for ethical concerns in AI and human-centered AI and responsible innovation. She's also a member of the Bavarian AI Council. Please welcome Andrea Martin on stage. And our second panelist is Professor Gitta Coutinho. You've seen her standing at the pulpit in the beginning. She's a professor of mathematical foundations of AI at the Ludwig-Maximilians University in Munich. She's the one who bridges the theory side with the application side and issues like trustworthiness and also explainability. She's the director of the Konrad Zuse School of Reliable AI and also one of the spokespeople of the AI Hub at LMU. Please welcome Professor Coutinho on stage. I have to excuse our planned third panelist, Stephanie Jacobs, from the Bavarian Ministry for Science, but she could not make it due to another obligation, so I apologize for that. But I'm very happy to continue the discussion with our two panelists here. Wow, so what should we start with? We prepared something, maybe we throw it overboard and just talk about what Yoshua told us. He gave us some very critical remarks on where AI is going. He himself turned from an enthusiast, I think, to, he still is an enthusiast, but he's a careful one now, and he really looks into what AI can also cause on the negative side. So we've heard about the shift may be going away from the classical research as we are used to at universities. We also know about the strengths of Europe, but we see a lot of research going to the US, taking place in the US and not at the universities, but more at the companies. And they are all based in the Bay Area in San Francisco. There's one next to the other. So I think it's a great ecosystem that we have in Munich, but the ecosystem there is even greater. So how do you see all of this, what Joshua described, the shift of AI research, so much changing, so much going away from the classical science and universities to those mainly US-based companies? What does this do to AI research? Gitta, maybe you can start.
Yeah, so I think many people are also very worried. I think universities play a tremendously important role in this, let's say, AI race, because universities are independent platforms, so where we can do research, deep research, also on many questions which were raised here concerning developing safe AI, concerning developing, let's say, non-agentic AI, also developing all these concepts which Yoshua Bengio talked about. And in fact, when you read his CV, he explicitly chose to stay in academia. He had many offers from companies, but he stayed in academia because then he has this independence and this freedom to do research. And companies, they usually have a productivity goal, so there are specific guidelines which then steer also their research, which is at universities much freer. And so in that sense, I see this with a great worry to answer your question that, first of all, research goes away from universities to a certain extent to companies which have also these large-scale GPU clusters, for instance, and also go often outside of Europe to the Bay Area. We know about the geopolitical situation, which is then in addition worrisome. So in that sense, I think what needs to be done is also to more heavily invest in research, in independent research, to also go in the direction of what Joshua told us.
Andrea, you're representing the industry side here. So what is your opinion on that?
I probably assumed to have the counter position now, but not totally, actually. I think it's actually, it can be a positive development if you say research is now within universities, of course, within institutions outside universities, and I think especially Germany has a good tradition or history in that with Max Planck and Helmholtz and Fraunhofer and so on. Fraunhofer being more application-related research maybe, and also companies. And of course, companies have a productivity goal. They have commercial interests. Yeah, sure. Someone has to pay my salary, actually. So, but that doesn't mean, I think, that companies cannot act responsibly, which doesn't mean that, and I will not call out anyone here, but that some of the companies with the commercial interest not necessarily act responsibly, at least not what I think is responsible acting on AI. But for example, and Joshua mentioned that he was kind of triggered to dedicate his career to save AI by ChatGPT in November 2022. And just to be, showing off a little bit, since 2017, we have published principles on responsible usage of technology in AI and have done research on that for a couple of years, because even in 2017, we said, this is what we do on fairness, this is what we do in explainability. Here are some technologies even that you can use to make transparent how AI is embedded in products. And so it's all about, also thinking about technology that can help to make AI safer or responsible or trustworthy. It's about processes you need to implement if you do AI projects, I think, and it's about the governance. Because you can have a quality certificate once you deploy AI into your company, into your applications, but it's about learning, right? So the applications evolve. So the question is, how do you govern this and observe and monitor while these applications are in production? So this deviates a little bit. So I think it can be good to have all of these players doing research, because it may be even a good thing that they may have slightly different interests, because then they, the whole research area may be broader. I think talking about the freedom of research, this is a tricky one, I think, because there are some companies funding institutes at the universities, and for me that always has a connotation of how much do they influence the research agenda. On the other hand, these collaborations can be very fruitful, because we always, and maybe especially in Germany, we struggle to bring the scientific expertise or results into practical application. And if you collaborate on that, it may be a leeway to do this better. So I think there are pros and cons with this evolution.
Okay. I heard
it's always grey. It's not black and white.
I've heard that there are universities that collaborate with industry. I don't know whether it's the case in this city, but of course it's being done. Yeah. But you do not focus on the two extreme sides. So there's poor academic, good research on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's purely commercial interest. You're voting for collaboration between the two sides.
Yeah, and not condemning, the commercial ones, condemning the scientific research and vice versa, because I think there could be fruitful collaboration.
Yeah. In order to collaborate, you need to trust each other. Yeah, it's trust between humans, trust between universities, companies. It's trust towards the AI systems. Can you define trust in this context, maybe from a scientist's point of view? What is trust in AI? When can we trust AI? Is there such a thing as trustworthy AI?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question, because I think everybody thinks something different when you hear about trust. So in 2019, there was a panel of high-profile experts in the EU, and they defined ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI. And that was the point. Robustness is critical, so this relates to technical robustness, technical aspects, so that an AI is safe, that an AI, if maybe some things change slightly, the AI also don't make a radically wrong decision. So this is on the technological side. Then certainly the AI needs to obey the laws, compliance with the current laws. This includes explainability, it includes transparency, and all the laws in particular now which we have in the EU AI Act. And then the third part was ethical aspects. So this relates, for instance, also to fairness and such values which we have, maybe even which go beyond the current laws which we have. So this is how this group defined trustworthy AI. And then there were several subcategories, but this is maybe one very good definition which one can use.
Andrea, anything to add from your point of view?
Yeah, I think there are interesting aspects around trust, and I have read a couple of publications also from the Bavarian Institute for Digital Transformation, because they have done some research on that, and I think it's really an interesting topic, because from a psychological perspective, well, I'm a huge fan of being transparent about AI is included in an application, what it does, where the data comes from, who has worked on it, and so on. But there are psychological studies that say there is a certain tipping point. So trust increases with the transparency, and if it becomes more transparency, trust goes down again. So it's a little bit like, if I know that it's verified data that is used, I will possibly trust the AI system. If I then dive deeper and look at all, if I would look at all the publications or the training data that has gone into it, I may find something that I don't like, and then my trust goes down again. So that's quite interesting from a trust perspective, that we also have to keep in mind. And then the other thing is that the question is, what is the object of our trust, so to say? Is it because we think, I take now this example, IBM is a trustworthy company, so I also trust the products that they bring to the market? Or is it a single application that I trust? So, for example, do I trust ChatGPT, yes or no? Do I trust because I know which people have worked on this, and if GitHub publishes an AI application, I say, yeah, I trust GitHub, so I think the application might be trustworthy as well. So I think is it the data that I mentioned before? So I think there are a lot of different aspects in this trustworthy sphere, and we have to think about for ourselves, what is the important thing for us? And then also, if you think further, I may use AI even though I don't trust it. Right? So if I now say, I don't trust a certain generative AI application, I deliberately don't call anything out, but I have a lack of time and I need to finish something by tomorrow, or I just don't have the expertise to do what I'm supposed to do, or I'm curious what the result would be, then I may still use the AI application, even if I think maybe it's not trustworthy. So that's also quite interesting in terms of our behavior towards these applications.
So it's not a black and white thing.
No, and it's a lot of different aspects that you have to think about. While I agree that robustness and fairness and explainability and transparency and data privacy, that's all important aspects to make something trustworthy. So, it's not a contradiction, it's just expanding.
So we agree on the principles that we should do it and this is the way to go, but also Yoshua mentioned that it's not so easy to implement even on the technological side. Can you explain a bit why? I mean, you mentioned that it's several aspects, this trust issue, yeah? Can you explain why it's so difficult to make AI? I mean, if there was a way to just code something and put it in place and then it is safe, then it would be easy, but it's not the case. Why is it so difficult to come up with safe and reliable and open and transparent AI systems?
Yeah, because as we already discussed, what is trustworthiness? What is exactly safety? So many of these, let's say, terms are phrased in laws, and but these laws are very different from, let's say, the technological aspects. So what we would need is you would need to have, let's say, a formalization of all those words and these terms. This exists, for instance, for privacy. There's a notion of differential privacy where you have a very precise, so I come from mathematics, so you have a very precise formula, basically, which you can check, and then this system is private. And so, many of these terms are vague, like explainability. What does it mean, the right to explain? That depends very much on the domain, on the application. It also even depends on the user. So what is a good explanation for you might not be a good explanation for you, depending on your background. So that makes it so extremely challenging. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, these systems like large language models are so complex. They are trained on the entire internet. So if you think about safety, if I come from my side, I would say safety, well, we would like to have some error bounds. We would like to know that in certain scenarios, the AI doesn't make a wrong decision and maybe in a, let's say, factory doesn't move out of a certain range. But since these systems are so complex, even proving these error bounds is extremely challenging, extremely difficult. So these are some of the aspects, but there are certainly many.
So we need defined criteria and we need a scale, or we need some, for certain use cases, we need some criteria to be adapted to that.
Yeah, exactly. So from my perspective, what would need to be done is, for the different aspects which we just mentioned, like explainability and so on, we would need to have, let's say, a more concrete definition, a formalization, which you can maybe even automatically check. And and then you have for each of those a scale, like a metric, how good this particular AI system is with respect to that metric. Like you buy a refrigerator, you have this energy scale, you know exactly how good your refrigerator is with respect to the energy scale. And so in that sense, having for all these terms, safety, explainability, also metrics, and for each AI system, ideally, to then exactly know how good they fulfill that, and then hopefully the trust is increased.
And now Yoshua Bengio was talking about these, how did he call it, uncontrolled agents who throw all of this overboard and just put everything in one one bucket and then use it all of a sudden all together. And he suggested to proposed a non-agentic AI scientist to kind of be on a watchtower to kind of guide AI or guide us as users through all of it. Do you think this is a good approach? Because everyone is talking about agentic AI now, and he just says, no, forget it.
I think this will certainly reduce the risks. Yeah? So if the AI doesn't really actively pursue to act in the world, it might mitigate the risk of, for instance, self-preservation and risks which he mentioned in this respect. Also, if it's non-agentic, it's easier to control, also easier to interpret. Still, I think it's not, in that sense, absolutely safe. I mean, it could still be that these systems also develop behaviors like scheming, what we see sometimes now of these large language models. I don't see right now how this can be immediately prevented. So I think, these non-agentic systems are easier to control, but I don't see that this is, then will lead us immediately to safety. Also there, we need to think about how to set them up, because these non-agentic systems, deep neural networks and so on are non-agentic systems. So in that sense, we already have them, and we see that there are also certain risks. But I think it's a very good direction. So in that sense, I'm not contradicting that. I'm saying, one still need to be cautious and also think about how to set those systems up.
Good direction. And Andrea, what do you think about this selfless platonic scientist who knows everything and decides everything in the right way?
Well, I read that also in Joshua's abstract. I think it was not necessarily mentioned, even if he talked about the scientific or the scientist AI in the lecture so much. I think what is needed is rather a cross-disciplinary approach, because with all the awe that I have for scientists doing their research, there are, how to say that, other people in the world as well who may have something to say. And even if you think that this selfless platonic scientist can come from different disciplines, like not just AI research or computer science even, but also from psychology or sociology or law institutes, medical people, economists, and so on, I think there's still, society, and we all are society, who may have different thoughts just from their experience of using or being impacted by the AI applications. Policymakers may have a specific say, because Joshua mentioned some of the economic risks for countries, for governments, or nations, and so I think just the selfless platonic scientist will not solve the problem on his or her own. So I think we need more than that. While science has to play an important role, that's no question about it. Or maybe rather research. Possibly. Right?
Yeah, it was somehow bigger than just this one platonic scientist. Yeah, but and I like the idea of setting something up. Yeah, up to a government level, world region level, global level, whatever. How would this go together with the economic interests of the companies? They have to have economic interests. That's no doubt. Yeah, but there's the one thing is the economic interest, the shareholder value, and the other thing is maybe the ethical concerns, the legal situations. How could this go together? Do you have any example how IBM does this?
Well, you could take the boards like the AI Council in Bavaria that you mentioned before as an example. Not talking about how impactful all of these boards around the world really are. But I think it's important to have this mixture, right? And in the AI Council, just to take this as an example, you have professors and scientists from universities, you have professors and scientists who work in non-university research institutes, and you have representatives from businesses. Yeah, and I think that's a good combination, because you have the different viewpoints to come together. And that's the starting point. And I would say most of the companies that we see represented in the AI Council have a good, even though different, understanding of using AI responsibly. So there's no one who says, commercial gains at the top and we are not interested in anything else. At least not with the companies represented in the AI Council. However, I think, and you could also say for Europe, and also the values that we have in Europe as societies, I think it could become a competitive advantage if companies would implement responsible AI. So I have a couple of principles which AI software I don't use, because I don't see that they are necessarily fair, or they are transparent enough, or they use data sources I don't like, or where I think they should not be used, let's better say it like this, right? And so I decide that I don't want to use those. And as long as I have alternatives with similar outcomes, I think it could become a competitive advantage that we in Europe have something like the EU AI Act that forces the companies who want to operate in Europe to adhere to some, responsibility principles. So I wouldn't say that it's completely contradictory to commercial interests. Yeah. It could even serve the commercial interests to think responsibly. Is it possible on a global level? I like the approach that Yoshua presented. I would very much like to see it implemented. However, I doubt if it's possible. And I mean, we see this with the geopolitical things that need to be agreed on or should be agreed on, and there is no agreement among all the nations in the world. And as much as I would like the UN or any other global institution to do something about safe AI, I don't think that everyone would agree.
So all of us would, I guess, in this room would agree that we need safe and reliable AI that is not harmful to others. But how do we take it to the next level, from your personal level and from what you said, the Bavarian AI Council is discussing, any ideas, Gita, on that, how to take it to the next level for AI governance, from those regional initiatives to German or European or global initiatives?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I think what really needs to happen is, that policymakers and people from industry and people from science work very closely together to do that, like also, Yoshua Bengio mentioned. And I don't see that happen at this level, at this point. So what we need are these networks, like also, for instance, the biosphere here in Bavaria, but then more on a global level to steer that. The UN could be some object like this, some institution like that, but also there, I don't see the progress as we would hope it to be. To set up, let's say, more governmental laws in that respect. So in that sense, I think it's a very difficult question. I completely agree. What was on the last slide, that would be wonderful if that could be implemented, but I also unfortunately doubt that will work. In particular in the geopolitical situation right now with the US, with China, and to really get everyone on one table, to agree, and maybe also to then take their AI out if they are not safe. That would be, ideal, but I also don't have a good solution in that respect.
Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't try.
Yeah, definitely.
Giving in or giving up is definitely not one of my principles in all areas. Right? So.
This is something that Yoshua Bengio started with, like we need investments, those countries, and he explicitly mentioned Europe. We need to invest in AI. Of course, others are investing a lot, and we are trying to, but at least we should try. So the Bavarian state government is investing in a Bavarian AI model, in a Bavarian AI foundation model. There's a lot of money in it, but it's not so much compared to the global level. But at least it's a first start. Absolutely. And there will be advancements in AI where even smaller investments can make a difference. And I think this is one of the glimpses of hope that we still have.
And I also think, and there was an interesting discussion recently on an anniversary of a global research foundation. I don't remember the name exactly, especially not in English. But there was also a discussion about ethics by design, and that's a principle that we also pursue as a company. So if we do projects, AI projects with our clients, in the methodology, how you design and develop and train and deploy and operate AI applications, in this whole life cycle, the ethical considerations are considered from the start. So it's not like developing an AI application, then putting it into production and thinking of, oh, and we now have to consider if it's fair, and if it's not, then we have to do something, but rather thinking from the very beginning, how can we make this as fair as possible based on the data that we have? And or what do we have with data cleansing to make it as fair as possible? So, and I think this is an approach. If we do this, I mean, the one side is developing AI applications, and Europe is certainly not on the first place there, to say the least. But it's still on us and the companies in Europe how to use the AI applications and what kind of measures or risk mitigation strategies and tactics you pursue to still make it make it possible to use it responsibly. So I think, it's possible also kind of like a grassroots, a little bit like a grassroots development.
Yeah, and so maybe you mentioned investments. I think, I mean, what we see right now, and think of the beginning of the talk of Yoshua Bengio when he talked about frontier AI, if countries or companies don't have access to that anymore. And I think if we look in Europe, I mean, if you look 2 or 3 years ahead, this is actually a serious risk in that sense. So I think in Europe, what we need, I mean, we need to develop our own foundation models, also build up AI companies in that direction to not lose this race and then be left behind. So I think that's something where politics need to act very quickly now and invest to, let's say, level the scope between Europe and also the US and China.
That was actually my last question I wanted to ask for this round. What is the very thing that we should be doing now in order to benefit from AI in a safe and reliable, in a trustworthy way in like 3 to 5 years in time,
Exactly, massive investments. I think that's
massive investment,
and also do it quickly. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion, and I think it's very good to discuss. I mean, that's certainly, the basis of our democracy. But I think now it's also time to really, let's say, increase the pace, invest quickly, because otherwise, we will be left behind.
So next time
we we don't even need to talk about safety and these aspects.
Don't overthink, act.
So next time we make sure the policymakers are right here on on the stage. Andrea, what is your take on this? What should we be doing now?
Basically, very briefly, you could say don't overthink and act. And it's a little bit, I read the request that Joshua also signed on Monday. I think it came out where, we're not talking about super intelligence now on the panel particularly, but saying, before any guardrails are agreed on and there's a lot of public buy-in, we should not aim for super intelligence or the artificial general intelligence. And I think this is good to start a debate. And I think this debate is necessary to think responsibly from the beginning and not in the aftermath when something went wrong. But it can also be risky because, he mentioned explicitly now in his talk that this doesn't mean that we should stop development or research on superintelligence, but some actors in the context or in our environment may think so, and then they may stop, regardless of if we want superintelligence and even know what it is. But that would mean, similar to the request a couple of months ago, where they said we should stop generative AI development for half a year or something like that. I think it was last year. Not sure about it. This would just mean not everyone would comply to this, and then they would move on and even have more competitive advantage. So I think, as I said, good to trigger a debate, risky possibly to have such requests because some may comply to it. And then I still think, it's a little bit like, there's the first car in the 20th century on the streets, and we say, don't do that any longer. We first need to decide on all the possible traffic rules possible, while there are 5 cars on the street, one here, one there. And, there is something that we can do in parallel.
Yeah.
And if there are more cars, then there may be, the right can go and the other one has to stop on an intersection. If the cars become faster, we may think about safety belts, seat belts, right? And I think some of the regulations or guardrails that we need, possibly, we may not be able to think about today because we don't know what happens in a year. As Joshua said, the development is very fast, so maybe we shouldn't overthink, but rather act, but act responsibly.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, act responsibly, invest, collaborate, and build trust. I think this is very important issues. And this, by the way, is what the AI lecture is all about. It's about talking to each other, building trust, and learning to collaborate. And this having said, I would like to invite you to ask further questions. You are a fantastic audience. Not everyone can ask a question, but we can have a last round of maybe 15 minutes or so. Who wants to go first? I can't see too much, but here are my colleagues with the microphones. Please raise your hand and tell us who you are.
My name is Eduardo. I run an AI company.
Sorry.
My question is a little bit more philosophical because it looks to me that we attribute to AI human characteristics, even though it might not be necessary. For example, if we start with the assumption that AI is a tool, then all the cognitive-related characteristics like trustworthy, explainability, etc., are not applicable. It's a matter of education at the end of the day for people to correctly use AI. But we say, okay, let's impose guardrails and regulation because some bad guys might misuse this tool. So we impose additional rules and guardrails for one single car, which is on the street right now, by the way, in Europe, in France. And the bad guys wouldn't care anyway for these regulations. So why not AI is considered as a tool, a sophisticated tool, and not something which has agency, because it doesn't? And why do we confuse emergent behavior, like the professor mentioned, with agency? It's not the case. So I think there are some analysis which requires to be done at the right philosophical level to address all these characteristics we expect from a super sophisticated tool. Another angle from what you said was explainability. So we know that Kahneman actually proved that human decisions are not fully explainable. We have system 1 thinking, system 2 thinking, so our decisions are mostly emotional, biased by a lot of underlying issues. So we cannot explain our own decisions fully. So this entity which is not able to explain its own decisions creates a foundation model, let's say, and makes a pre-training to generate a model. And then suddenly we expect from this new object which results out of this activity to be explainable. And I see it as a contradiction here. Thank you.
Well, I can start, and I think you should probably have been on the panel because I'm not sure what the question actually was. But maybe going back to how you started with the philosophical question, say if we consider AI as a tool and not as something like a social being, which is indeed it is not, right? It's basically, especially generative AI, the biggest sweet talker in the universe probably to all of us. And you said that AI, if it's a tool, the whole topic of trustworthiness would not be a question to be discussed at all, if I understood you correctly. I slightly disagree, because there are certainly tools out there where we don't need trust, or where I don't need trust. Let's take it from my perspective. But even if you think of Excel, I have to trust that it calculates correctly. Right? I can prove if I say multiply 2 by 2 and it says 4, I say, yeah, that's correct. But if I take numbers, 6 digits and times 6 digits, I have to trust that Excel corrects it correctly, calculates it correctly. So I think there is, in a lot of applications, a certain level of trust that we need that it does the things in the right way. Right? Now you can question if this applies for Word or any other text editing program, because you see what you do, and it doesn't actually act or calculate on anything. But this is the first aspect. The second aspect is, I think it's way too late for all of us in society as citizens to go back and say, hey, AI is just a tool. That's not the way how it's used, and I don't think you can wind back time on that. So we have to deal with the fact that we tell stories about AI tools understanding things, reasoning things, sensing things, which they don't. But it's the wording, it's the terminology that we use to explain what it actually does. Yeah. Not explainability in terms of the safety, but explain what it does. And it's certainly not scientifically correct to talk about understanding and reasoning and sensing, but it's the language that's out there. So it's too late to say, now let's go back 10 years, and we start all over and we say it's just a tool. Will not work, from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to that. In particular, I mean, if you think of robots, of embodied AI, yeah, I mean, I agree with you, it's only a technology, but still people, since it sometimes even looks like a human, yeah, think of humanoids, or think of also, for instance, the robotic dogs, which you see in other countries. Maybe it's natural also for us humans to then develop some, let's say, attachment to these, to view that also as another, let's say, living creature. I mean, one can debate if this is good or bad, yeah, but I think this is to a certain extent maybe sometimes natural. And so, I mean, also concerning the trust, yeah, so for instance, if you sit in your car, your steering wheel is not connected anymore to your wheels by, let's say, a special metal rod. I mean, you have to trust the electronic that your signal from the steering wheel is correctly transmitted to the tires. So in that sense, I mean, technology is also all about trust in some sense. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the terminology like safety, trust, and so on, I mean, that is true, or that needs to be satisfied by basically most of the technology we use these days.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. More questions?
No, we said it all.
Yeah, thanks. So training the foundation models is not just about investments in basically like a company. It's also about energy in a lot of times, right? So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this regard, basically in Germany, or how do you see the landscape? Because yeah, there are huge projects going on, somewhere else in the world to supply this energy in huge amounts, and what can Germany do to kind of, also participate from the energy side?
Yeah, so maybe I can start with that. I completely agree with you. I mean, there's a huge amount of energy which is used, and in the US, I mean, you see these new hyperscalers, and then the nuclear power plants which provide enough energy are built right next to it. And I mean, in Germany, in Europe, this is not a direction we want, we won't go. And so, I mean, then there's the question like you ask, I mean, can we compete? And so, I mean, I'm actually a bit optimistic because there are a lot of very exciting projects here, also in Bavaria and Saxony, for also building new chips which are much less energy or much more energy efficient, like for instance neuromorphic chips. And so in that sense, if we can go that direction, we would also ensure, in a certain sense, technological sovereignty, which is another aspect we didn't talk too much about. I think that is also important for Europe, that we have a lot of tools we can develop here on European soil. And so in that sense, there's, for instance, one project, Next Generation AI Computing, between Saxony and Bavaria, which goes in that direction, aims to develop highly energy efficient AI systems from a both soft and hardware viewpoint. And so the hope is, with these new technologies to be able to maybe compete in an even better way.
Yeah. And I said, I just can underline what you just said. And I think sustainability is a very important issue, because there was, we were both at a conference 2 weeks ago, and it was longer ago, whatever, end of September. And then someone showed a graphic, and I think it was by 2030, where the energy need by AI overall, all functionality, not just generative, but everything, kind of exceeded the energy production. And that
was my figure, yeah.
Sorry, whatever. I remember your digital and analog papers, that's a different thing. And I think that didn't even include the energy that we consume, right? And so it was just AI. And so I think two things. The one is, if you think of generative AI, the question is, what's the future, my perspective, of large language models? Or do we rather need smaller language models that are specific for a particular task? So like, I don't know, weather forecasting used models for a very long time. If they now use AI-based models, why should the model include, let's say, information about the French Revolution? It's completely unnecessary unless there were some particular weather phenomena at that time, right? But not about the politics, just not needed. So if you make smaller models and then maybe use one large language model to write a good text about the conclusions, it would be less energy intense than, yet another large language model. That's the one thing. And on the other hand, I very much underline what Gitta said about what is the future architectures, chip architectures also, that we need to reduce the energy consumption. And we have, for example, a whole research lab that focuses on AI hardware. And they think about, are digital chips really the ones and zeros? Is that the future? And I very much doubt, and I will see if I'm right maybe in 5 years, that scaling up GPUs is the solution. For me, it's not, because that would feed into your energy model, right? But rather analog chips or accelerators or the neuromorphic chips, right, that we also do research on. I think that's something that companies should focus on, if they. And that's also acting responsibly with our environment. Yeah, so I think, different aspects that we can pursue.
Okay. Thank you very much. One last question. We're approaching 8 o'clock. Till, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Others, sorry, then.
We also have one question from the chat.
Yeah, let's do this, and then.
Then you next, yeah.
Yes, exactly. On quite this different aspect. And namely on the catastrophic forgetting of human skills. So the question is, we observe that employees, workers, and students stop learning. How could we address that?
I can start, as you took a step. I think, yes, there's more access to knowledge through AI systems, while we also need to be careful to validate if the knowledge, if what it tells us is really true. So I think skills like critical thinking and also a little bit trust in yourself and questioning things is something that we need probably more focus on in schools and universities, like when we went to school and university, because of the technology evolution. I think that's the one thing. I'm a bit hopeful yet, however, because I have a niece, she's 18, she will finish school next year, and we asked her recently, it's just one anecdote, so, but maybe there are more like her, and we asked her how they use AI in school. And she said, I can tell you how I use AI in school, and sometimes I use AI to look up things. I would argue then you could also use search, but whatever. And then I said, yeah, and there's some of my co-students who use AI to write essays, for example, right? Regardless if the teachers know about this or not, I don't know. But she said, but why should I do that? I wouldn't learn anything. And I think if we kind of manage to infuse that into young people, and not only in young people, so basically in all of us, then I have some hope on that. There are a lot of different aspects and additional aspects that we could talk about on education, digital literacy, and so on, but I will just stop here.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very difficult question. I completely agree with what Andrea said. I think as new technology emerges, we humans change. Yeah, just think of this simple example of navigation systems. I mean, who of you can now remember all the streets in Munich without a navigation system, or in Bavaria? So we rely on that. So we change basically our behavior in that way. But now this is much more, let's say, catastrophic in a certain sense. But I mean, what you see, for instance, I just heard that at the ETH in Zurich, I mean, they changed their courses of programming. So now, I mean, they teach programming in a different way. They teach it if you use, let's say, ChatGPT for programming. I mean, then it is more the task you need for debugging it, because it has hallucinations. You need to still understand programming. You need to learn about it. But maybe you don't need to learn how to program all these little, let's say, programming parts. So in that sense, I mean, they changed their teaching, their education system. And I guess this is something we need to, I mean, also quickly contemplate and discuss, I mean, both in universities and also in schools.
Thank you very much. Now our final question, Till.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting discussion. Thanks a lot. So we've seen from Yoshua that over time those models get more and more performant, and they can do much greater things. So I would like to ask you, in terms of looking into the future, what do you see, like when you attend conference and so on? And of course, science is one of the earliest to see what's on the horizon. So my question is, what is the next big thing? We've seen large models, we've seen agents, now it's multi-agents. Is it those world models, embodied AI? Like, what do you see? And maybe you can give some examples of the capabilities that we might be able to expect in a few years from now. Thank you.
Well, looking into the future is quite difficult, especially in these times when things develop that fast. I can tell you what my hope would be, because I don't think I can answer the question, what is the next big thing? But my hope would be, and that's also a very personal thing, is that, and I'm afraid that it probably takes longer than we expect, that the next big thing is how AI can be used in medicine and therapies. And personalize them even more and beat some of the illnesses that are out there. That would be my big hope. That was a big hope 5 years ago. And they said it will come in 3 to 5 years, which was not true, right? And it also depends, of course, on the data that we have available to do the research and to feed AI with. But that would be, if that comes, that would be the big thing, for me at least, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely difficult. I mean, so still thanks for the question. But I mean, if you look into the future to predict what comes, I mean, I expect that AI, I don't know, in 4 or 5 years will exceed humans in all different tasks, maybe not in this, let's say, generalized manner, but in the different tasks. I mean, what I hope to see, and maybe, I mean, in the sense of energy efficiency, what I find also fascinating is, I mean, this going more into the direction of, let's say, mimicking maybe the human brain, still, I mean, controllable in a certain sense, but then, I mean, we can drive the energy down, we can maybe also increase reliability. So this would be something I would like to see. And then maybe also what I already mentioned, this metric system, so that then when you buy an AI, you know exactly, I mean, in the different metrics like explainability and so on, how much to trust.
Thank you very much, Professor Gitta Coutinhoc, Andrea Martin.
Oh, wow.
We have some flowers for you.
Thank you.
Guitar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Dankeschön.
Wow. Thank
You're
you.
a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for the
thank you.
discussion. The next big thing for all of us is some drinks out there, I would say. But let's keep discussing what the next big thing in AI is, maybe. I have two announcements. There's a next event by the Bavarian Institute of Digital Transformation this coming Monday at 27th of October, 6 p.m. It's called Humans and Machines Working Hand in Hand. When can we trust AI? It's by Professor Ute Schmid und Dr. Roland Stürz from BIDT, Einsteinstraße 28, Volkshochschule. And the next AI lecture will be on the 10th of June, 26 next year. It's not sure who will come, but we have 3 great events planned already. It's going to be great people that will continue to discuss AI with us. Enough being said for now. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for my colleagues Annika, Anna, Amelie, Lydia, everyone who contributed to this wonderful event. Please enjoy the reception and enjoy the evening. Thank you so much.